You are listening to episode number 85 of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. In today's episode, we're having our second three-peat in a row. We're bringing back Ria Jairam, and we're talking about the JT modes, so stick around. Hey y'all, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am your host for this podcast. Like I mentioned, we are talking about the JT modes in this episode. We're talking with Ria Jairam. She was kind enough to come on. This is my second three-peat in a row, so thank you, Ria, for coming on. Basically what happened is I was looking for somebody to talk about this and never got a response from anybody, and I kind of threw it out there in a couple of the Facebook groups, and she was kind enough to say, if you don't hear anything by Tuesday night by somebody else, let me know and I'll be happy to come on. And unfortunately I didn't, so she was kind enough to come on, and we had a great conversation about all the JT modes, the JT65, the JT9, the FT8, and several other of the other iterations of the JT products. So before we get to the interview, there's a couple things that I want to mention. First off, all the links that we're going to talk about in this episode, as well as some additional information, can be found in the show notes. And you can find that at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/85. That's the number 85. It just astonishes me that I'm already at episode 85. 85 episodes that I've recorded and edited and wrote show notes for and researched, and just hours upon hours of work. And the reason I do it is for y'all. For y'all out there, that is why I do this. I mean, I love doing it, don't get me wrong, but teaching something, y'all learning something is why I continue to do this. However, and this is not a bad however, and before I say this, let me apologize in advance. I have a cold, so I might sound a little bit different. You might hear me sniffling. I'm going to try not to while I'm talking. I have a cough drop in my mouth. So if I sniffle, I'm sorry in advance, and I will try not to. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Here we are, 85 episodes in, and y'all have just been awesome. Unfortunately, the recent adoption of my 4 kids has led a greater amount of responsibility in my life, and there's some things that have to be done, and unfortunately I am being lax on some of them. So starting next month, I'm going to go to a 2-a-month schedule, I guess you could say. It's going to be every other Thursday starting in October, and I believe the first episode will be the first Thursday in October, I think is how it lays out. But I'm going to go to just every other week. It's basically, basically it's going to cut my work in half. I am going to continue to write blog posts. I've been picking up on that here lately. I've been writing a blog post on normally on Sunday or Monday, and releasing it on Sunday or Monday, and then having my podcast episode on Thursdays. So I am going to continue to do that because I can do that a lot at work, and write stuff like that. So I am going to do that, and I'm actually probably going to include one extra blog post on the opposite week of my podcast. So I'll still be producing content, but the actual podcast part of itself is going to go to every other week. So 2 a month is what I'm going to be doing. So thank you for your continued support, and I hope that you continue to support me in this, and helping me hold up the standards that I have. And one of the things that I've noticed here lately, it's been really hard to find people to come on the show. As you noticed, in the last 2 months or so, I've had Ria on twice. Now I've had Ian on again, and it's getting kind of hard for me to find people to talk to for some strange reason. So if you have something that you would like to talk to and you would like to come on to my podcast, please send me an email and let me know what you want to talk about. I have several things that I want to talk about that I'm looking for people. So if you know anything about this, I'm looking for ALE. Somebody to come on and talk about ALE, WinLink, NIVIS, near vertical I can't even talk. Incidence Skywave, I guess you could say. If you know anything about those, give me a shout. Come on my podcast and help me teach the rest of my listeners. If you know somebody, please get them in contact with me. You can send me an email, k5clm@everythinghamradio.com, and we can talk about it, hook it up, and see when we can do it. So, I guess really the other thing that I really want to mention, I want to thank Sterling Coffee, November 0 Sierra Charlie. Sterling was nice enough to, sorry about that, y'all. I kicked my trash can. Sterling was nice enough to become a Patreon patron, something like that, of my podcast. Thank you very much for doing that, Sterling. Some of you might have heard of him. He has his own YouTube channel. He has his own blog. He is a former youth editor for the ARRL. He was actually on the Ham Radio 360 podcast about this time last year. It was back in August of 2016, where he talked about youth in ham radio. And I believe he's done a couple. At that time, he was fixing to, or was just coming back from Austria, going to a Yoda summit. So thank you, Sterling, for that. There will be links to his YouTube channel and his blog and several other things that he has done in the show notes of today's episode. So make sure you check those out and show Sterling some love. And thank you again, Sterling, for becoming a patron. So that pretty much wraps it up. Let's go ahead and get on with the episode of today, or the interview of today, rather. So here is Ria again. Thank you again, Ria, for being my second three-peat in 2 weeks. Hey, everybody, we are back. We are here today with Ria Jairam again. She was kind enough to answer my Hail Mary call back on Monday, I guess it was. I put a feeler out and said, I need somebody to talk about some stuff for Wednesday. And she's like, if you don't get anybody, I'll do it for you. So, it's really neat, the amount of friends that I've made since I've been doing this podcast. And Ria, I have to say, is one of those people that have just kind of jumped in there with both feet and have just willing to help me anytime that I can. So thank you very much for that, Ria, and thank you for coming on again today. Go ahead. Well,
you're very welcome, and I just like to say, it's part of paying it forward, and it's part of the Elmering tradition.
Absolutely, and it's like I read an article not too long ago that they were talking. Well, I think it was the ARRL article about them finally realizing that the status quo needs to be changed, and I wholly believe that the Elmer in the hobby is kind of in a way falling back a little bit and is not as active as it once was, back when we were first starting this hobby and before. So I think that's what it is, and I firmly believe in being an Elmer. So if you are listening out there and you have not become an Elmer to somebody new, make sure that you do, because it will change their whole outlook of what amateur radio is. So, so we're going to talk about the JT modes. I've heard a lot about them. The JT65, the JT9, and now the new one that just came out this last month, I believe, the FT8. So, Ria, why don't you first off tell us about what the WSJT first off stands for and what it is all about.
So, WSJT is an acronym that basically means weak signal modes, or weak signal by K1JT. And K1JT is basically the brains behind this whole operation. Dr. Joe Taylor, he's a famous Nobel laureate, actually, astrophysicist at Princeton University in New Jersey, and he has been, using his smarts to write software for amateur radio to enable us to work very weak signal communications. So, we can basically now, when people think the band is dead, we can fire up WSJT or WSJTX and then make contacts in quote-unquote impossible conditions. So this is one of the things. And the main thing, though, is that initially Joe developed this mode for moon-bounce communications and meteor scatter, which are very, very weak signal, where you have a lot of your signal, most of your signal being lost in the atmosphere because you bounce off the moon or you bounce off a meteor trail. And it extended to HF, where people can use low power and compromised antennas and still make contacts. So that's basically what it is in a nutshell.
Wow. And when was it first developed?
So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like the universe, that the pulsars that Joe studies. It was kind of like, formed together out of bits and pieces. Initially back in 2001, W7PUA developed a mode called PUA 443, which you use with a kit software-defined radio, and it was used for weak signal communication, moon bounce, I believe. And then Joe had also developed the FSK 441, I think it is, mode for meteor scatter. And then eventually, by the way, W7PUA, I believe, is a silent key now. I'm not 100% sure. But, he is, his work lives on in Joe's software, because WSJT and the JT modes are actually based in part on that work. So, and it comes down, you mentioned the Elmering tradition. One of my Elmers, Tony 9Y4 Alpha Lima, this other guy, 9 Zulu 4 Bravo Mike, there's kind of like, in Trinidad we have a tradition, we would poke fun at people when they try to do something ambitious. So Leon, 9Z4BM, said, well, I'm going to do moon bounce with 2 Yagis pointed at the moon and WSJT software. And Tony was so skeptical. He's like, no, you need stacks and stacks of antennas and kilowatts of power to do that. And then, everybody laughed at him. And then later on we realized, maybe Leon had a point. So, Leon, if you're listening, you have a point.
So you don't, I guess, necessarily need a kilowatt of power and stack of these. You could actually do that relatively easy? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, oh yeah, actually you don't need stacks and stacks of antennas, on HF especially. You can do this with 5 watts, you can do it 20 watts, you can do it with 50 watts, and it varies with the mode. One of my friends, Eric, N2RJ, he lives in his apartment, and he has a ham stick on top of his car, and he sneaks out and runs a cable at night, because, during, the landlord, you don't want the landlord to catch you, right? I'm just kidding. He runs a cable out to his car, and then he runs the ham stick, and he runs, I think, maybe 20, 30 watts of power, and he's able to make contacts worldwide with that. It's unbelievable, whereas on SSB you'd be trying and you say, well, I can't hear you, you're down in the noise. Well, guess what? WSJTX can hear you down in the noise and then decode and, pick up that signal and complete the contact.
Okay, so you mentioned the JTX. I'd never heard that. I know there was the JT65 and the JT9 and now the FT8. How many actually different sub-modes of this JT systems are there?
Well, okay, so I'm sorry I confused you a little bit. The JT modes, there is actually JT65, the most popular ones. There are some others. There's JT65, which sounds like an ice cream truck. That's the one that's well known by a lot of people. There's JT9, which sounds almost like a continuous tone, but it's just basically a narrower signal. And then there's FT8, which is the new kid on the block. There's also MSK144, which sounds like a bunch of digital hash, and it's used for media scatter communication. There's FSK441, which was the original Joe Taylor designed mode for media scatter and pings. WSJTX is basically the name of the software that most people use, but there are other bits of software that you can use. You can also use, there is one called JT65HF, which is kind of out of date, but some people use it because it's easy to use. And then there is also JTDX, which is another one. So WSJTX, I should mention, is the only one really developed by a team headed by Joe Taylor and a few other developers. So, it's the most popular one and it has the most features. And I think right now it's the only one with FT8 in it.
So is this whole thing like open source or?
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, it's GPL version 3. So that means anybody who uses the source code must also publish the source code of their derivative work. And then, Joe puts up a big splash when when the software starts up that says GPL version 3, free as in freedom.
Cool.
Yeah.
So can you explain the differences? You mentioned a little bit the sound differences, but can you mention the differences between at least the three main things, the 65, the 9, and the FT8?
All right. So let me start with the 65 and the 9, since they're the most similar. So basically, JT stands for Joe Taylor. And so both these modes were developed by Joe Taylor. And the difference between the 65 and the 9 is that the number of tones being used. So in JT65, there are 65 tones, with 64 of them being used to carry information, and one of them being used as like a synchronization tone. So it's there, to keep everything synchronized. And JT9 uses 8 of them and also uses 1 as a sync. So the advantage of JT9 over JT65 is that it's a little more sensitive. I think it's like 2 to 3 dB more sensitive than JT65. Now JT65 can decode signals, I think, down to like minus 24 decibels, whereas JT9 can go down to like minus 26. So it might be JT9 has been targeted a little more for low power, more weak signal contacts than JT65. But, it's kind of an anomaly because most people, they gravitate towards JT65 because most people are using it. Now, the FT8 is the new kid on the block. So I should mention that with JT65 and JT9, each over takes about, I believe, 43 seconds for the actual transmission. And then you have an interlude where you can then decide what to do, and then it'll start on the next top of the minute, another transmission, and then it goes. FT8 reduces that down to 15 seconds per over. So instead of taking 6 minutes to complete a QSO, you're taking 1 minute. And it's called FT8 because, I hope I pronounce his name correctly, because Joe developed this along with K9AN, who's a professor, another professor, I believe, in Central Illinois or something like that, electrical and computer engineering. And he, along with Joe, developed this mode. It uses a different modulation. Well, actually, both of them use FSK, frequency shift keying, but it uses a different encoding scheme. It also uses a different error correction scheme. And through tweaking it, they're actually gotten it pretty much to where it's almost pretty much a replacement for JT65, just faster. But, of course, it's different modulation-wise. But people are basically gravitating towards that because it allows such fast completion of QSOs. The FSK 441 and the others are basically different. They're more wide-banded for media scatter and not really used widespread on HF.
So you said that there's 65 tones in the JT65. Is that like one tone per letter and number and stuff like that, or?
So when you're dealing with such weak signals, you have to basically transmit in an efficient manner. And I was surprised and not so surprised because, I deal with computer coding and programming and stuff like that, that they do not actually send your call sign as ASCII characters over the air. What they do is they encode it in a special code. What they did initially was they figured out, well, ham radio call signs have this pattern where it's 1 to 2 letters, at least one number, and then a suffix of 3 letters. And, or they might have put more letters. And then they reserve a few extra for signal reports and procedural things like 73 and CQ and Roger. And they reserve 1 bit for the signal report. So they encode this into, I believe, 72 bits in JT65, and I believe FT8 does 74 plus the 13-bit CRC, which is basically an error correction code. And then this is transmitted using the tones. It's encoded using the tones and then transmitted over the air as audio. So, it takes a lot to go from text to ice cream truck.
So, from what I'm understanding, then the JT modes is really not for sitting down and actually having a conversation with somebody. It's more along the lines of hey, I made calling CQ and then I'm answering you and you're saying whatever it is you say, and then it's just back and forth kind of. It's not really a hey, how's the weather in your place, stuff like that.
No, definitely not. I can't rag chew with you, like, hey, Curtis, how was the weather doing? How are the kids? That kind of stuff. No, these are just for basic USOs. These are for you're exchanging 3 vital pieces of information. Your call sign, your Maidenhead grid square in 4 digits. So, for example, my grid square is Fox November 21, FN 21. And then you exchange a signal report. And the signal report is in decibels, but it's not really an absolute signal level. It's basically something that the software calculates based on the band noise and makes an estimate of what the signal to noise is on the band for that signal.
So it kind of sounds to me like it's just like a, I hate to say this, but kind of just like used for chasing QSOs is basically all it's really used for.
That's what it's used for. It's used for chasing awards. It's used for investigating propagation. And it's also used for, you can send small messages, 13 characters, but it will take like 15 seconds or a minute to send that message, Wow. So it's basically for experimentation and awards chasing. And if you want to type and chat, you use PSK31. Now, I should also mention Joe has another program called Whisper, which is Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. That one basically has the software just automatically keying your station and sending out beacon messages, and then other stations receive it, and then they aggregate this into an online database of propagation. So you can actually measure propagation that way.
And that's WhisperNet, basically, right?
Yeah, Whisper, WSPR.
Cool. I didn't realize that he wrote that. When talked about it, I think, a little bit before on some interview I did. Somebody would mention WhisperNet, or maybe it was on another podcast or something like that. But yeah, I had no idea that he was the one that actually wrote that.
Yeah, Joe is. I'm telling you, I'm very amazed. He's how old is he now? I think he's over 70 now, and he's still cranking out software. And it's amazing. Hey, we're really blessed to have him in the hobby.
Yeah, well, you do what you love, and you love what you do, and you have fun doing it, right?
That's right.
So, all right, y'all. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Ria about the JT mode. So stick around, y'all. We'll be right back. Do you have an old-fashioned voltage or amp meter hooked to your station? Are you looking to find something that has more bells and whistles? Check out the West Mountain Radio Power Check. The Power Check has 8 display modes, including voltage, current flow in either direction, wattage, and amp hours, and will measure from 0 to 60 volts with 40 amps continuous load. It is accurate to within 10 millivolts and 10 milliamps. It has a backlit graphics LCD that will display data in digital, analog, and bar graph formats. You can even monitor your battery backup with a programmable gas gauge. The non-volatile memory stores more than 100,000 data points without power. That's nearly 2.5 months worth of data at 1 point per minute. It has a USB computer interface for configuration and data download, and you can program it to sound an alarm for overcurrent, over and under voltage, and amp hours. The software that comes with it allows you to program every aspect of the power check operation, such as data logging rate, display formats, and alarm conditions. You can display current, voltage, wattage, and amp hours in real time. It has an integrated charting software that automatically collects and displays data. All the data can be downloaded and stored for later analysis. If this sounds like something you would really like, make sure you head on over to everythinghamradio.com/WMR and check it out. And if you do, and enter the code EHSUMMER at checkout, you will get $50 off of your purchase. Normally the power check runs $184.95. If you enter the coupon code EHSUMMER, you get a $50 discount, and that comes to $134.95. You can't beat it. The offer expires September 30th, 2017, so make sure you head on over and get yours before the coupon expires. Also, don't forget to pick up your free USB port monitor with your purchase. Again, that's everythinghamradio.com/WMR for more information. Hey y'all, we are back with Ria, and we are talking about the JT modes. We talked last segment about the different types, the JT65, the JT9, and the FT8, and basically kind of a starting overview of what it actually is. So let's talk about the actual, like, I guess, equipment and procedural type things that you need. First off, what do I need in order to operate any of the JT modes?
Okay, so hardware-wise, you would need basically what you need for a lot of other digital modes. You need a computer, and the computer must have enough CPU power to decode the signals. Although that isn't really critical because, some computers can do it, but I've seen some where if you run multiple programs on it, it tends to choke and not decode. So you need that. You need a computer. You would probably need a sound card interface. It's recommended, although some people have used like a microphone, hold it up to the computer, and it worked that way. But you can use a sound card interface like your Rig Blaster or Signal Link, or in my case, since I use a Flex Radio, I just use the built-in digital audio exchange. And you need an HF transceiver. Or a VHF, but let's talk about HF. So you need an HF transceiver and a suitable antenna, and you're in business. Software-wise, you need the digital mode software, which can be WSJTX, it can be JTDX, it can be JT65HF. Most people using WSJTX, and most critically, you need time synchronization on your computer. And the built-in time synchronization in Windows does not be sufficient. You need something a little better. I use Mindberg, which is an NTP client, which continuously keeps the clock in sync. Some people use Dimension 4, which is another alternative. So, it's up to you really, but you must have that clock in sync. And then once you have that, you're in business.
Okay, so why is the time synchronization so important?
So basically, as I mentioned, these QSOs, they're very structured. With the JT65, every over starts on the top of the minute, exactly. And you'll actually see a column in the JT software that says DT, or delta time, which means the software calculates how much out of sync you are. And you should try to keep that below 1 second. FT8, same thing. You have 15-second overs. So you have 4 overs per minute, and everything starts on time. So the trains cannot run late on this one. Yeah.
So by the overs, I'm assuming you're talking about the sides of the conversation, right?
Yeah, like I would call CQ, and then you would answer with your signal report. I would answer with mine. I'll give a Roger, and then you give a 7-3, and I give a 7-3, or it works that way.
So you could really, like, with the JT65, you said it's what, 6 minutes to make a QSO?
It could be It could be 6 minutes. Some people try to do it less. Like, let's see, you have a CQ with the grid square. You have the reply with the grid square. Then you have the initial signal report, and then a reply signal report, and then the Roger, and then optionally another Roger, and then you have 73. So it could go as much as 7 minutes. But most people, they just skip the one of the Rogers and just proceed straight to 73, and that saves a minute. So, yeah, you can do it in 6 minutes.
So I guess basically, does the software itself, does it basically fill out all your stuff for you whenever you're doing the transmit and stuff, where you like just press a button or something?
Well, in prior versions, you had to generate them. You would input your call sign and your grid square in the software, and then you basically double click on whoever you want to work, and then it'll basically generate a set of standard messages for you, and then you can put those in. Previously, before the latest version, before FT8, you had to basically monitor the whole thing, and when the next person sent their transmission, you had to click on the appropriate message and then click send again. There's another software called JT Alert, which began to automate that, where after each transmission, it would queue up the next message, and all you had to do was enable transmit. And then the new version of WSJTX has something called auto sequence, where you answer somebody and it'll basically select all the messages and iterate all the way through until the end, and it'll just prompt you to log the QSO. It's scary. We have Skynet now. It's become self-aware.
So it is the software, is it like integrated into like Logbook of the World or EQSL or something like that to log the QSOs?
No, right now the software gives you two options to log. One of them is it'll generate a standard ADIF file, and that you can import that into your logging software, and then in your logging software you can then upload to Logbook of the World. The other option is to use JT Alert, which is a very nice software package that automates a lot of things in WSJTX. What you do is that one will link directly to your logging software, whether it's Log4OM, which is what I use, DXLab Suite, and I think Logger 32, and a couple others. One of them is Ham Radio Deluxe, but it really doesn't fully support Ham Radio Deluxe, but some versions support it. Anyway, and that one will basically put the QSOs in your software as soon as you log them. So you can automate it to that degree, or you can import the log file, the ADIF file, at the end of each session.
Okay. So now that we know what kind of software you use and what kind of hardware we use, let's talk about kind of the operational side of things. Is there a set standard frequency that we use, kind of like with PSK31? There's a set frequency that's used. Is it the same with JT modes, or can you use it anywhere in the digital portion of the band?
Well, theoretically you can use it anywhere, but the software comes pre-programmed with a number of different frequency windows built in, and that's where watering holes, basically. That's where most people will look for JT contacts. So when you get the software, you'll see a little drop down that says the name of each band, and I can just click it. Like if I want to go to 20 meters, I can click it and go to 20 meters. If I want to switch to 160, I can go to 160. If I want to go to 6 meters, I go to 6 meters, and it selects the correct section of the band, the correct frequency. Now, in the 1.8 with FT8, depending on the mode you're using, whether you're using JT65 or FT8, well, JT65 and JT9 or FT8, it will also switch to that window, because there are different frequency windows for FT versus JT, because they're incompatible modes, but they're closely related.
Okay. So rather than a set frequency like PSK31, it has like a range of frequencies. Is that my understanding? Am I understanding right? So
right now each band I think has like 2 kilohertz assigned for, well, not by the FCC, assigned by the software for the FT8 mode, and you'll be able to view this entire window. Since your sound card can give you like a your radio can have like a 3 kilohertz bandwidth, and you process this through your sound card, you will be able to see that entire spectrum. You'll be able to see everybody CQing and making QSOs. So, yeah.
So what kind of bandwidth does these modes have?
Oh, the bandwidth is really not much. The bandwidth for JT65 is less than 200 hertz, and JT9 uses, I think, like 15 hertz. So it's really not much. And FT8, I think, uses probably a little less than JT65. To be honest, I don't have off the top of my head, but it's very, very narrow.
So you can potentially have several QSOs going at once in that 2 kilohertz of frequency.
Well, yeah. I mean, right now I have it scrolling in front of me, and I'm seeing basically each over. I'm seeing at least 10 QSOs in the window scrolling by each time.
And that's, correct me if I'm wrong, but like single sideband voice, the sideband is what, 2.5 kilohertz? Am I right on that?
Well, it can vary. It usually, yeah, it could be like 2.7 is like a normal SSB bandwidth.
So you basically can set your radio and see 20, 30 different QSOs going on basically that same frequency. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, not the same frequency, but the same frequency window. So yeah, you can set it up to look at the not the PSK, the JT or FT window, and then you can see it. You can see all the QSOs there, and actually that's the way you have to operate. You have to look, and a lot of times you do split operation. You know, like if somebody calls, you just call them on another frequency, so you don't QRM them.
So if I'm operating the split like that, how do they know that I'm calling them?
Well, in the software will see that you're calling them, and it'll highlight them in red. So it'll highlight you in red. I'm sorry. So if for example, if you call me, if you call CQ, and I call you with my grid square, on your screen it'll light up red because I called your call sign. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if I'm on the same frequency or a split one. It'll show up in red, and you just have to double click that, and then you'll have it. You know, the software will take over and generate the messages, and then you can send them and complete the QSO that way.
So it kind of like the RIT function basically on like single sideband radios. It kind of.
No, think of it like split operation. Okay. Like, you know, if you work DX, like you'll hear somebody saying, P5 KJU Kim Jong Un. I'm hoping he gets takes up DXing instead of building weapons. But he let's say you have the somebody saying my call sign listening 5 up, you know. Mm-hmm. So they're transmitting on one frequency and then they're listening on the other one. So in JT modes, you know, you can still work split, right? Mm-hmm. Because by default they're actually listening to the whole window. They're decoding the whole window. So if you call in another frequency, it really doesn't matter. They can answer you still, and then by that way, you're not drowning them out, or you're not QRM. Everybody's not QRMing on the same frequency.
Okay. So what kind of power output do you need to operate this?
So that's interesting, and that's a subject of much debate and controversy. My opinion is you use as much as you need to complete the QSO, while being courteous of other users. Now, this can be 5 watts, this can be 10 watts, this can be 50 watts, this can be 1,500 watts, with a caveat. So on HF, you typically don't really need more than 50 to 100 watts on FT8. With JT65 and JT9, you can probably use less. A lot of people use 5 watts and less. A lot of people use 25 watts and less. On 6 meters, however, you need the power because the signals are so weak and the paths are not as good as on HF. So with 6 meters, you'll need more power. It depends. You might not need it if the band is wide open. On moon bounce, if you're using the JT65A mode, which is used on moon bounce, you're going to have to put the full gallon and you're going to have to put, antennas, good Yagi antennas. So it really depends on band conditions, but for a lot of people, it could work on low power. Like I mentioned my friend Eric with his ham sticks, and he uses, I think, like 50 watts. So
I know when we were talking about PSK back in episode 76, I think, with Ian, he mentioned that with PSK31, when you put more than like 30 watts in it, kind of distorts or overdrives the signal and can kind of mess up. Is it the same thing with the JT modes?
That is kind of that is yes and no. I mean, a lot of it has to do with both ends of the QSO because some people's receivers are very sensitive and they will basically overload with any strong signal in the passband. But a lot of receivers can handle it just fine. And it also depends on how clean your signal is too, because if you're running, an amplifier that's overdriven and not tuned up properly and it's splattering all over the place, or you have AC hum in your signal. This is a common one I've seen on FT8, where people have had AC hum in their signal and it basically splatters all over the band. So it's not simply a function of power. People like to say this is a low power mode, but it's really a weak signal mode. You're working weak signals. And they may be low power or they may not be. But as with everything, you should try to put out a clean signal. And when you put out a clean signal, you can run more power, without interfering with people. Of course, keeping the power down is good amateur practice. You should always use the minimum amount to achieve the desired communications. And, most times I run 50 watts. There are times I would run more, because if the band is marginal or, there's a DX contact that's not hearing me, maybe he has an indoor antenna or something like that. So, there are many factors. It's not a hard and fast thing.
So I read somewhere on one of the articles I was reading today, and I'll put a link in the show notes if I can find it. A guy was talking about how he was making a contact with somebody over in like Africa or something like that, and the guy had some kind of RF interference or something like that. I'll have to go look. But he said that he could actually see it on his scope where he was putting out a signal like every 100 hertz or something like that. Have you ever had that instance other than the AC hum like you were talking about?
Yeah, so if you're overdriving your signal, if you're putting too much audio into your transceiver, that can happen too, where the signal will basically splatter and multiply across the waterfall. So that is possible.
Now, with this, my situation here with these high transmission power lines that I have. Would this mode be good for me to use, possibly to get out, or would the interference that I'm getting from these things really just kind of splatter the band for me?
Well, I mean, it really depends. If the interference is just on your receive end, it's not really going to cause a problem. I think with power lines nearby, you're not really going to have a problem where you're getting AC hum on your sound card interface. Otherwise, I'd be hearing AC hum from you right now, right? Mm-hmm. Right. So, yeah, I don't think it'll be a problem. On the receive end, you might not be able to work as much as somebody with a nice low noise floor like me, or where we would be able to basically hear a lot weaker signals without the interference of noise.
So basically, it really wouldn't hurt me so much getting out. It would be me hearing other people.
That's pretty much correct.
Okay. I might have to try it. Just for
Just for giggles.
Yeah. I was gonna say the other part of that, but yeah, just for giggles, let's go for that. I might have to try it one of these days if I can ever find my rig blaster. I have one around here somewhere, but don't know where it went to. So last question I have for you. and you might have already answered this partly or whatever, but what makes the JT mode so special and so the in thing now?
So, gosh, do I have to choose one?
No, absolutely not. There's several of them. Be my guest.
Okay. So a lot of what makes JT mode special, for one, I think that it has brought new life into HF modes for a lot of people, because a lot of people are frustrated that they could not make contacts on single sideband. And let's face it, some people don't want to learn CW, and that's fine. I work CW and I work weak signal CW, but it's not for everybody. I would like to encourage people to do it, but because it's fun, but it's not for everybody. So this is an alternative you can use to make contacts and chase your rewards and investigate propagation. That's one thing. The other thing is that you can also provide a lot of scientific data. For example, during the solar eclipse, I took part in the solar eclipse QSO party. I didn't actually make any contacts. What I did was I set up my flex radio that you had the chance to use. I set it up with about 6 pan adapters, just gathering JT65 and FT8 signals from the time of the eclipse. We didn't go to totality, but I figured my station, hearing stations going into totality, because I also went down to the low bands where it was supposed to affect the most. I would submit this data via something called PSK Reporter, which would take reports from my software. Oh, this is another thing. WSJTX in these software can actually automatically upload whatever it hears to PSK Reporter, which is very good. And it's fun to see what your station can hear. I leave mine on overnight and I see. So that's another fun thing. And finally, the fun thing is that you can basically chase a lot of rare DX without having to put up big antennas and big towers. Like, I could work Japan, I could work Australia, I could work China very easily with this mode.
That's really awesome. I want so bad to get on HF again. I had so much fun when you let me use your Flex radio remotely. I so bad that I could do it. And this might be the one thing that I can get into. I mean, I thought maybe PSK would work, but I mean, like I told Ian last episode, all I hear is static, and it's like a S9 plus 20 is basically all I hear. So I don't know if it's my radio, if it's actually is the power lines. I haven't actually got another radio in here to try it out to see if it's my radio or not, but this might be something that I can look into, especially if it's more on the receive side than the transmit side, like you say.
Well, I'll tell you what. No, on the transmit side, it's fun. It's addicting, and even though you can't, sit down and chat, you can work a lot of DX. You can fill your logbook. You can get QSL cards, and a lot of these people confirm electronically via Logbook of the World and EQSL, so it doesn't have to get expensive postage-wise. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, Curtis. I would really encourage you to look into it, at least,
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get it done.
Yeah, that definitely might be something I can do and get me some more contacts on HF. I'm dying to get on HF again. It's literally driving me crazy. I'm like, all right, I have the station, I have this nice high peak. I mean, I literally from my back porch I can see about 70 miles, and yeah,
wow.
I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I'm literally 5 foot below the highest point in my county. And I'm sitting at like 968 feet above sea level, and everything else is down below me.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm almost that high up here. Yeah, but I think you'll do well. And the thing about it for me is that if it weren't for the JT modes, I would have had a much harder time getting VUCC, because I just applied for my VUCC. I have enough contacts for my VUCC, VHF, UHF, Century Club on 6 meters. When the band was closed, quote unquote closed, I was able to get on using JT65 and FT8 and work people. And remember when we talked about in our remote episode where you could just put on like a remote desktop software and get on? Well, this is the other good part of it. you don't need a fancy setup to do remote operation. You can just have a computer and you put your remote desktop or your splash top or whatever. There's this guy who's big into JT modes, N2ADV. He does splash top on his, and he's like on a treadmill, and he's working JT65, so or FT8 now.
Alrighty then. Well, that definitely would be an easy thing, hit a button, hit a button, hit the button. Yep, made a contact. Woohoo! And I'm out of breath, and you don't even know it.
That's the time passed by.
Exactly. Well, Ria, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about JT modes. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you want to mention?
I think you covered it pretty well. I would just like to tell people it's a lot simpler than it sounds. I thought initially when I was setting this up that it would have been really complicated, but no. You put it on, you set up your sound card, you set your time sync, and you set up the rig control using the cat cable. Well, now it's all with the flex radio, and bam, I was off to the races. So, you know what? Give it a try. And even if you think you live in an apartment and your indoor antenna or your ham stick or your attic dipole cannot make any contacts, you'll be surprised at what this will do.
Alrighty then. Well, thank you again, Ria, for coming on. And if y'all have any questions about the JT modes, then leave a comment in the show notes, and I'm sure we can get that answered for you. Again, you can find the show notes for today's episode. And we're going to have links, everything that we've mentioned in today's episode, as well as probably a couple others. You can find those in the show notes, and those are at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/85. That's the number 85. Wow. Just amazing that I'm up to 85 already. So I guess, Ria, thank you very much for coming on, and I will talk to you next time.
Hey, maybe. I listened to the last one. I think the last guy, who it was, he said he was the first one doing 3.
Ian Kahn, yeah.
Ian, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll probably be the first one doing 4.
Well, you never know. But, yeah.
Think of a good topic and hit me up. You know what it is.
There you go. All right, Ria, thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye. Wow, that was a interesting interview with Ria and talking about the JT modes. It was really, really quite interesting. One thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up this episode, it's going to be a little shorter than it normally is, so that's pretty good. I mean, we're still at almost on an hour, so not really a whole lot shorter. But anyways, before we leave, I wanted to make sure that I got this and mentioned this. As you heard in last episode, I've started to make custom signs, custom plaques. I made a couple for the guys over the Ham Radio 360 podcast as a thank you for all the help that they've done. And Billy Jones, November 5, Echo Victor Delta, if memory serves me correctly, was my first official order of these signs. And it's shipped to him. He should have it today, at the day this goes live on Thursday, the 7th. He should be receiving that in the mail. I hope he likes it. I will have a picture of it in the show notes of today's episode so y'all can see what it looks like. I can do pretty much any kind of graphic or any kind of whatever you want on it. Totally customized plaque. So if you're interested in that, you can go over to everythinghamradio.com/swag store, SWAGSTORE, all one word, and it'll take you to my web store. When you go into the web store, you'll see one of the signs that I made for George over the Ham Radio 360. Just click on that and order it, and then send me an email with what you want on it. Your name, your call sign. If you have a certain logo that you want on it, send it to me. Or if you want to send me an email beforehand with what you want on there, that would probably be best to make sure that I can do it. Because, kind of hard to do really detailed things in wood. But, shoot me up on email, k5clm@everythinghamradio.com. Send me a picture of what you are interested in. If I can do it, then just go to the web store and order it, and away you'll go. Or we'll work out something. But anyways, head on over to the show notes and check out the one I made for Billy. And Billy, thank you very much for my first order on my of my signs. I'll also be making some desk plates, some name desktop call sign plate thingies, and I'll have a picture of those up as well pretty soon, hopefully. I hope to make one here this next weekend. But I guess that pretty much wraps it up for today. Again, I want to thank Sterling for becoming a Patreon on my Patreon account. If you would like to do that or help in some other way monetarily, there are 3 ways you can do it. One of them, you can make a simple one-time donation through PayPal. There's a link on the bottom of the show notes that you can do that with. You can become a per-episode contributor through Patreon like Sterling did. Or you can simply shop on Amazon.com through my affiliate link. You can find more information on each of these ways that you can help at everythinghamradio.com/support. Again, you can find all the stuff we talked about in today's episode on the show notes at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/85. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio for the page, and the group is at facebook.com/groups/everythinghamradio. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/everythinghamradio and on Twitter at K5CLM. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up. Ria, again, thank you very much for coming on and saving my rear end of not having a guest again. So until next time, this is K5CLM 73, y'all.